الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا اللهم يسر لنا اليسرى وجنبنا العسرى اجمع لنا بين خيري الدنيا والأخرى أما بعد we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for steadfastness and to always grant us sincerity and the ability to act upon this knowledge. So before we continue inshallah ta'ala, there was one problem or one issue that was raised that is regarding al-Fatiha. We mentioned that reciting al-Fatiha is a pillar in the Salah. And according to the Shafi'i School, it must be read by everyone who is praying, the Imam, the Ma'mum, the one praying behind the Imam, and everyone. And we also mentioned that if someone enters the Salah with the Imam, they must recite Al-Fatiha and finish Al-Fatiha even if the Imam goes for ruku'. Okay? And then they catch up after they finish the Al-Fatiha. Unless they come when the Imam is in ruku', for example, then they come and join the Salah straight into ruku'. Or they join the Salah, but the Imam, for example, he's about to finish the surah. Okay? So let's say he's reading لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. You join the Salah and you start Al-Fatiha, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and you recite whatever you can, and then you follow the Imam. Okay? That is regarding Al-Fatiha as being a pillar in Salah. And alhamdulillah, we have finished the 2/3 of this book. First third is the conditions of Salah. Number 2 is the pillars of Salah. So now we should all know the conditions before Salah and the pillars within Salah. And now we're going through the nullifiers of Salah, which is the last third of the book. Things that break a person's prayer. So the author, rahimahullah, says on page 32, as for the nullifiers of prayer, there are 12 nullifiers. So how many conditions for prayer were there? Does anyone remember? Without looking in the book. 12. Yeah, 12. So conditions for Salah, 12 as the author mentioned. And then the pillars for Salah are 19 as the author mentioned. And yeah, the nullifiers again are 12 as well. Okay. Inshallah, easy numbers to memorize. And then he says, number 1, missing one of the 12 conditions of prayer purposefully, even if forced or out of forgetfulness or ignorance. So we've studied the conditions before Salah. Okay. So if someone does not fulfill the conditions of Salah, one of them, the Salah is invalid. So for example, if a person does not take wudu and then he performs a prayer, the Salah is invalid. Or if he performs a Salah with wudu, in the middle of the Salah he breaks his wudu, for example, right? His Salah is invalid. The author here, he says purposefully. If someone prays purposefully without wudu, for example, the Salah is invalid. And he also says even if forced or out of forgetfulness. So if someone forgets whether they have wudu or not, and they prayed, and after they prayed they realized, oh yes, for sure I did not have wudu. What is the ruling of the Salah? It's invalid. You have to repeat the whole Salah again. Likewise, for example, praying before the time, you realize you prayed before the time of Salah, after you finish the Salah, then you have to repeat the Salah. Likewise, the awrah, we have to cover the awrah in Salah. If the awrah is revealed and we do not cover it immediately, the Salah is invalid. Right? Because covering the awrah is a condition for the Salah, and etc. You can look through the conditions again. So we'll write this down quickly so we can look at the differences. So the first nullifier of the Salah is missing a condition. And here we'll say regardless. Meaning that if someone leaves a condition purposefully or out of forgetfulness, it doesn't matter. The Salah is invalid. Number 2, he says missing one of the 19 pillars of prayer purposefully. So the first one was missing the conditions, now missing the pillars, one of the pillars of Salah. But then he says purposefully. Okay, so we have to put a line under purposefully. So number 2 is missing a pillar is purposeful. Okay. So he says, therefore, if it was out of forgetfulness, then he must perform it when he remembers. And what he did after the missing pillar is not considered until he performs it. And we discussed this before. What if someone, they are in ruku' and then they go down for sujood? So they're in ruku' and then they go down for sujood. They miss the i'tidal coming up after ruku'. Okay, what do? They come back. Okay, they must straight away, as soon as possible, come back to the ruku'. Okay, to ruku' first and then come back up. Not straight to i'tidal. Okay, as we have mentioned, if that happens out of forgetfulness, obviously if someone misses a pillar purposefully, as the author mentions here, the salah is invalid. You know you have to go for i'tidal after this, after ruku' you have to come up. You purposefully go for sujood, the salah is invalid. You have to repeat the entire salah because it's playing around. Okay. So that's the second nullifier of salah. And then third, he says, to add a pillar from the pillar of the limbs, or to make an intention, or make takbiratul ihram, or salam in other than its place purposefully. So yesterday we divided the 19 pillars or the 13 pillars into how many categories? 3. We said there's the pillars of the heart, which is the intention. We had this pillars of the tongue. Okay, there are 5 as we mentioned. Can anyone mention them? Pillars of the tongue. Takbiratul ihram, and then al-Fatiha, and then tashahhud, and then salam, and then one more. After the tashahhud, what do you do? Salah. So these are 5 pillars of the tongue, and then the rest are the pillars of the limbs, the actions. Okay. So the author, he says to add a pillar from the pillar of the limbs. So if someone adds a ruku' in salah purposefully, someone adds a sujood purposefully, knowing that they did 2 already, they're adding a 3rd sujood. So that invalidates the salah, that breaks the salah. Or to make an intention, meaning that you're in the middle of salah, you make another intention. Okay, because intention is only in the beginning of the salah when you make takbiratul ihram. Or to make takbiratul ihram or salam in other than its place purposefully. So if someone is purposefully in salah, they say assalamu alaikum, they want to make the salam, right? Then they have broke the salah. Okay. So adding intention, takbiratul ihram or salam in other than its place, again purposefully. Number 3, to add the pillar of the limbs, or to add intention, or to add takbiratul ihram or salam purposefully. Okay, so that's number 3. Therefore, if he did it out of forgetfulness, so someone added a ruku' out of forgetfulness, or added any pillar other than what was mentioned purposefully. So what are the pillars that are not mentioned if someone adds them? For example, someone recites al-Fatiha in their ruku', for example, purposefully, even if it's purposefully, the salah is still valid. Okay, it's not here. Adding another Fatiha, for example, saying the tashahhud, for example, in between the 2 sujood, even if it's purposefully, the salah is still valid. Okay, so these action of the limbs, intention, takbiratul ihram and salam only. If it's done purposefully, that breaks the salah. The prayer is valid. Okay. Therefore, if he did it out of forgetfulness, these ones, or added any pillar other than what was mentioned purposefully or out of forgetfulness, his prayer is valid. So if you come to the next page, there's a diagram. Yes. So you have it there. On to the next page, page 34. Number 4, he says to make one excessive movement or 3 consecutive movements purposefully out of forgetfulness or ignorance. So number 4 is movement, we say. This one is regardless as well. So similar to the first one. So if someone does, as the author says, one excessive movement, such as jumping, or they give a good hook, for example. Right? This is excessive movement, okay, too much. Or 3 consecutive movements, small movements, right? 1, 2, 3. Okay, consecutive, it's connected to each other. Okay. Obviously, the scholars they mentioned with a big limb. What does that mean? With a big limb, for example, the arm. They move the arm. If you just move the finger like this in salah, it's not counted. If you move your eyebrows up and down in the salah 100 times, it doesn't break the salah. But moving a big limb, for example, walking in salah, that's counted as a movement. 1, 2, 3 consecutively breaks the salah. Okay. So if someone does not do it consecutively, for example, before they recite al-Fatiha, they scratch here. They recite al-Fatiha after they finish, they scratch here. So before they do the ruku', they do like 5 movements. But it's not consecutively, it's not connected. There's a break in between, that's no problem. So 3 consecutive movements, as the author mentions, or 1 excessive movement. That breaks the salah. And here, the author mentioned regardless. So purposefully, out of forgetfulness, doesn't matter. Okay, that's number 4. And then number 5, he says, to eat or drink purposefully.
Start
Yes.
question
Yeah.
about that. For example, in Jama'ah, sometimes, somebody, for example, goes to break his wudu. So he goes out, and then the saf in front of you is empty. So you have to move forward. So you have to break your steps, so not to do.
I mean, the saf usually isn't that far. So what you do is usually 2 steps and then stop. Because otherwise you'll be walking the entire salah.
Yes.
Yeah. So 2 and then stop.
And then move again.
Yeah. Or try to make your step a bit far, 2, and that's it. Yes, that's a very important one. So to eat or drink purposefully. To eat or drink purposefully. So again, eating or drinking purposefully, even if it's a small amount. So we have a diagram on the back, on the next page. So eating and drinking purposefully. So, meaning if it's purposefully, the salah is, will the salah be valid if someone purposefully eats or drinks? Invalid. Yeah. Excellent. So purposefully, regardless a big amount of food, they eat a whole burger during salah, or they even habbat simsim, as the scholars mentioned. Right, small seed. So if you have a small seed in between your teeth, and then you get it out and you swallow it, that's considered as well. So when we say eat or drink, it means inhaling or swallowing anything, right? Including, yes, that's which comes out here. If you swallow it purposefully, and you don't spit it out, that can invalidate the salah. Purposefully. Whether it's a big amount or small amount. Okay, this is why we need to clean our mouth before we come to salah. If there is something, try to, spit it out, put on our fingers or clothes, right? Do not swallow it. It's very important. That if it's purposefully. Now if someone, accidentally or forgetfully swallowed something, for example, is the salah valid?
Yes.
It's not valid. Even if it's a big amount. They said, I forgot I was praying. Can we accept that? No, so we say if it's out of forgetfulness, or it's an accident, for example, they didn't do it purposefully, then we say if it's a small amount,
It's okay.
salah is valid. Okay, accidentally, small amount, but a big amount, no, salah is invalid.
Or you forget the big amount.
Yes. And this is why the scholars say it's invalid, because when it comes to fasting, if someone eats a whole plate and they forget that they're fasting, is fasting valid? Valid, right? But it's different to salah. Salah, even if it's a big amount out of forgetfulness, the salah is invalid. Because in salah, it's different from fasting. You could forget while you're fasting, and then you eat a whole plate, for example. But during salah, it shouldn't happen. So this is a bit of detail. I believe the diagram is here as well on the next page. So then the author, he says, therefore, if it was out of forgetfulness or ignorance, that is excused. So ignorance, that is excused. So there is ignorance, there is excused, meaning acceptable, no problem. Scholars mention, for example, someone just accepted Islam and they didn't know in prayer they ate, for example, right? They ate something that's next to them and they just accepted Islam, or they live far from the scholars, far from people of knowledge. They can't ask anyone. They live in the Amazon, in the middle of jungle, nothing, right? But alhamdulillah, today we have internet, so that is not an excuse, right? We should try our best to seek knowledge. So ignorance that is excused. So what is ignorance that is not excused? Meaning that you have access to people of knowledge that you can ask. Okay, today with internet, for example, or you have been a Muslim a long time. This ignorance that is not excused. It's not acceptable. Even if you said, but I didn't know. No, it's not acceptable. It's not. You have no excuse. So this is what the author meant by ignorance that is excused. And then he says his prayer would be valid. So if it's out of forgetfulness or ignorance that is excused, his prayer would be valid if it was a small amount, and would be invalid if it was a lot or big amount. Okay? So that's briefly regarding eating, the fifth nullifier of salah. And then he says number 6, engaging in anything that breaks one's fast other than eating or drinking. So what are the other things that can break a person's fast other than eating or drinking? Does anyone know? Anything that can break or nullify a person's fast other than eating or drinking? Okay, for example, I'll give an example. One of the things that break the fast other than eating and drinking is inserting something into the jawf, right? You insert something through your ears, for example, or through your front or back private part, inserting something that can break the fast. Sorry. So if during the salah someone inserts something into the ear, like earbuds or a feather or something like that, they put it inside and they play around with it, this can break the salah because it breaks the fast as well. Or anything else that breaks the fast generally, it breaks the salah as well. Except for eating and drinking, there is this detail to it. So engaging in anything that breaks one fast other than eating or drinking. So that's number 6. Pretty straightforward. Number 7, he says cutting one's intention, such as intending to leave the prayer. To leave the prayer. Okay, so number 7 is you're in prayer. You say, I'm going to leave the salah. I'm going to leave the salah. I'm going to stop my salah. Or for example, next rak'ah, I'm going to leave my salah. You have the intention to cut your prayer. This straight away, just intending that, your salah is invalid. Why? Because when it comes to salah, when it comes to intention, you have to have jazm. You have to, I'm going to pray. If you say, I'm going to cut my salah, that's it. You broke your salah already. Even though you didn't do anything that nullifies the salah. Just by intending that you want to cut the salah, it's finished. Okay? That's number 7. And number 8 is similar. He says to leave the prayer depending on something, such as I will leave my prayer if Zayd comes. So number 8 again regarding the intention. This time you're not saying I'm going to cut my salah. If someone knocks on my door, if someone walks in, I'm going to break the salah, for example. If someone or this happens, or I'm going to break my salah. So you're tying your salah to something else. It could happen, it could not happen. If it doesn't happen, you're going to finish your salah. If it doesn't happen, you break your salah. This as well, as soon as you intend that, it breaks the salah. Right? As we mentioned, when you pray, you have to be 100% sure I'm going to pray, I'm going to finish. Okay. Obviously, mandatory prayer.
When will this intention happen? Because you pray, you have the intention to pray.
Yeah.
And then when will this happen?
Inside the prayer.
While you're praying.
Yeah. So while you're praying, in your second rak'ah, for example, you say, if my parents knock on the door, and then I'm going to break my salah straight away, for example. And, you tie your salah to something, basically. Like if it happens or not, if someone rings on the door, I'm going to break my salah. If someone calls my phone, I'm going to break my salah. So you tie your salah to that. You have to say, I'm going to pray, I'm going to finish. Regardless. Okay.
But if it's that compulsory salah, are we allowed to break the salah?
No, if it's mandatory prayer, you can't.
You can.
Allah. Number 9, he says to have doubts whether to leave the prayer or not. Such as if something happened during the prayer, then he becomes doubtful whether to cut and leave the prayer or to complete it. Okay, so now in this case, you're praying, you didn't tie your intention to something, and then something happened. Okay, and then like, should I break my prayer? Should I not? Should I break or not? Should I break or not? So as the author says here, such as if something happened during the prayer, you're praying, and then you heard a loud noise, for example, something broke or something like that, then he becomes doubtful whether to cut the prayer and leave or to complete it. Then you're doubtful there. You should throw the doubt away, continue in salah. Okay, if you leave the doubt, you're doubtful for too long, you've broken the salah. Okay. It's pretty straightforward. Number 10, he says, having doubt in one of the obligations of intention. So we mentioned when we want to pray, we have to intend, an obligatory prayer, we have to intend 3 things. What are they? If you want to pray Dhuhr, for example, what do you need to intend? Fard. Dhuhr, yeah? Excellent. One more. That you're going to pray, the action that you're going to pray. So you're going to pray Dhuhr, which is a mandatory prayer. So 3 things. So that's the obligations of intention, as he said here. And then he says, if the doubt stays, so having a doubt in one of the obligations of intention. So you're having doubts now after the salah, once you started, did I intend Dhuhr or Asr? Did I intend to pray or not, for example, right? If the doubt stays for a relatively long time, so again, if the doubt sinks in and you just leave it, you don't take the doubt away as soon as possible, this can invalidate the prayer. Or he performs a pillar of the limbs or tongue with it. So while you're having that doubt, you're doing another pillar, you're moving on, right? This is invalid. Okay? You have to kick the doubt away as soon as possible. If you are sure you didn't intend Dhuhr, for example, you didn't make the intention properly, then you repeat the salah. Okay, but if you're doubtful, waswasa, you kick it away. Okay, but if it stays too long, and you do another pillar, for example, with that doubt, you can invalidate the prayer. Okay. 11. It says to cut off one of the pillars of the limbs for a sunnah. Pillars of the limbs for a sunnah. So again, we mentioned the pillars of the limbs, which are, we can mention them. Let's go, bismillah. Mention any that you remember from the top of your head. Pillars of the limbs in action in salah. Ruku', excellent. Sujood. I'tidal, yes. Not tumanina. Tumanina is in every ruku', sujood. Yeah. So we have ruku', sujood, i'tidal, and then between the two. Yes, sitting between the two sujoods. And then
The last sitting.
last sitting, fine sitting, yes. Anything else? Standing, excellent, mashallah. Anything else? And we had order. Okay, so that's 7. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so if one of the pillars of the limbs, so to cut off one of the pillars of the limbs for a sunnah, such as the one who stands up and forgot to sit for the first tashahhud, then he goes back to sit, doing knowingly, purposefully. So this happens if someone in the second rak'ah, in the second sujood, they should come up and do what? Tashahhud, right? First tashahhud. But instead, after sujood, they came up. They moved to the next pillar, right, which is standing, from sujood to standing. What is the ruling of the first tashahhud we mentioned? Sunnah, right? The pillar is the last tashahhud. The first is a sunnah. So now he's in the next pillar. He cuts off the pillar to go to a sunnah. He goes back to the first tashahhud. Does that make sense? So now you're already standing up in the next pillar. But then you say, I didn't do the first tashahhud, so you go back down in and sit purposefully. Okay? As the author says here, purposefully, knowingly. So this breaks the salah. Why? You're adding a movement in salah. If you missed a sunnah and you moved on to the next pillar, you cannot turn back. Or another example, in the Shafi'i school, if a person is in, after ruku', he comes up, he leaves the qunut and he goes for sujood. If he, I didn't do qunut, can't come back up. No. You missed it. Khalas. That's it. Does that make sense? Okay. So, as the author mentions, purposefully, knowingly. So if someone doesn't know the ruling, for example, then we should, let them know that once you come up, you don't go back to sit down. If the imam comes up and he left the first tashahhud, you come up with the imam. Okay.
So you don't correct the imam that way?
No. So now you come up for the first tashahhud and the imam stood up. We shouldn't say subhanallah, tell him to sit back down, because we have to stand up. Khalas, he left it, we stand up. Okay. Or the opposite, for example, if we stood up and the imam is sitting for tashahhud, then what do? We stood up already. and the Imam is in tashahhud. We forgot. Should we go down? Yes. So Ma'mum, we're praying behind the Imam.
We follow the Imam.
The Imam is in tashahhud. Okay, but we forgot, we came up. The Ma'mum praying behind the Imam, we stood up again. The question is, should we go back down with the Imam? Or no, we already moved to the next pillar, we stand up.
You follow the Imam.
Follow the Imam. Okay, so it's always different scenarios when it comes to praying behind the Imam. Okay, it's very important to remember. Knowingly, purposefully. So if someone forgets and they did it unintentionally, they sat back down. So you studied the book, right? Safiinatu, al-Salah, the ship of Salah, right? Someone studied the book, Safiinatu al-Salah. He said, once you stand up, you can't go back down. Okay. So when you're praying, because it's the first time you never practiced that, oh, forgot first tashahhud, and you sit back down. And then you remember, I'm not allowed to do this. Should you stay here? You come back up. Huh? You come back up straight. You have to stand up. As soon as you remember that you cannot do that, you come back. Because you miss the sunnah, you come to the next pillar, you can never go back. That's it. Right? Do not break the order of the salah and then add new actions into it. Does that make sense? Does that make sense, everyone? I'll repeat it again?
Yes.
Okay. So, we've studied the book, yeah? Now, once you stand up, you miss the first tashahhud, you cannot go back. Okay? You cannot go back. But then, when you're praying now, let's say you're an imam, for example, and then you're panicking, you stand up, I forgot the first tashahhud, and then straight away you go back down. And then you remember, I'm not allowed to go back, I left the sunnah, I went to the next pillar, right? You cannot go back down once you stood up, that's what we said. Now you remember that you cannot do this is illegal. Should you stay and do the tashahhud? Or do you have to come back up because you missed it? You missed the sunnah. Okay, so we said you have to come back as soon as you remember because you missed it already. Like you missed the bus basically. Is everyone clear on this one? Okay. And then number 12, the last one as the author mentions, he says to stay on a pillar for a relatively long time while he is sure or doubtful that he left a previous pillar. As we explained this before as well, that if you left the pillar, you have to go back as soon as possible. So the author here is saying, for example, if you forgot i'tidal again, and now you're in sujood, you're on the ground, right? And then you remember that you didn't do i'tidal. Okay, the author says that you have to come back straight away. If you stay in sujood for a long time, a relatively long time, the salah is invalid. You have to go back to the previous pillar that you missed. Because of what? Order. You have to have order. So if you stay on the wrong pillar for a long time, you don't go back, salah is invalid. You have to repeat the whole salah. Okay. To stay on a pillar for a relatively long time while he is sure or doubtful. So see, even if you're doubtful, did I do i'tidal or not? Even if you're doubtful, you have to go back in and do it again. That he left a previous pillar. In fact, he must return as soon as possible to the pillar that he left for sure or doubtfully. So that's what we mentioned. Unless he is a ma'mum, then he must add a rak'ah after the salam of the imam, and it is impermissible to return. So I believe we explained this once as well in the previous class. If that you're praying behind the imam, right, and then you forgot a pillar, you skipped a pillar, but the imam didn't skip it. Right? For example, let's give an example. The imam, so you're standing, right? You're reciting al-Fatiha, and then the imam is in sujood. Let's say, for example, you stayed behind because you're reading al-Fatiha. The imam is in sujood, and then after reciting al-Fatiha, because you're panicking, you go straight to sujood. You forgot the ruku' and i'tidal. The question is, now do you have to go back, stand up and do ruku' first? Or do you follow the imam in sujood?
Follow the Imam.
Follow the imam. And then what you do at the end?
Hey,
You add a rak'ah.
When do we add the rak'ah?
When imam gives salam, you add a rak'ah. You stand up and add a rak'ah.
So we don't give salam?
No, you add a rak'ah. Okay. Is understood, everyone? Okay. And that is the end of the nullifiers of the salah. And one more nullifier that the author did mention that is probably important as well is that talking during the salah. Okay. Talking during salah also nullifies or breaks the prayer. When we say talking, it means you're talking to someone else, right? if you say in the middle of salah out of nowhere, Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, that's dhikr, no problem. You recite the Quran, you do dua, that doesn't nullify the salah. Right? But if you say, how are you doing during salah? It's breaks your salah. If you speak to someone, so al-kalam am, so speaking purposefully. Right, here quickly. So speaking during the salah, we have purposefully, let's say, forgetfulness. Right? Or you were talking inside yourself and then words came out of your tongue, right? So what if a person speaks during the salah purposefully, the salah is invalid. Okay, the scholars mention, even if it's one letter that can be understood. So in English, let's say, for example, one letter, and in K, for example, right? K you can understand from that. But obviously, speaking only in Arabic and Salah, right? Like they mentioned Qi and A and etc. But speaking one letter that can be understood during the Salah can break the Salah. Even if it's one letter, if it's understood, if you can understand something from that one letter, it breaks the Salah. Okay, it's understood. Even if it's one letter. So that's speaking purposefully. Now, what if someone speaks during the Salah out of forgetfulness? Someone next to them sneezes, they say Alhamdulillah, and then you say Alhamdulillah during the Salah. What is the ruling of the Salah? You forgot that I'm not allowed to speak in Salah, for example. We say, so if you only speak a small amount of words, right, 2 words, for example, something like this, the Salah is still valid. If it's a large amount or a lot of words, the Salah is invalid. Does that make sense? So, this is just briefly on the ruling of speaking during the Salah. Anything else, inshallah? Does anyone want to add anything?
Shaykh, what about laughing?
Laughing
But like
quietly,
and chuckling.
like the sounds.
Yeah.
So laughing is the same ruling as well. If there's letters coming out of it, like in Arabic, ha, yeah, for example, they say in Arabic, like ha, that's if you're laughing, ha. For example. Like if the letters come out or are apparent, that breaks the Salah. But if it's just smiling, that doesn't break the Salah. Right. You're laughing, yeah. Some scholars even say the wudu is invalid, you have to repeat. So you should avoid laughing.
Does preceding the Imam
Preceding the Imam. In the Shafi'i School, I believe, if you proceed by 2 pillars, I believe, from what I remember, 2 pillars, then it breaks, it doesn't break the Salah. Allah Alam. It doesn't break the Salah, you have to leave the Imam. Allah, I have to revise that. Right? If you Sabqul Imam, right? Going before the Imam, 2 pillars, I believe. But does it break your Salah? Or do you have to leave the Imam? I have to check that. So, anything else?
So while you're praying and you realize, oh man, I forgot the wudu. Yeah. So how do you physically? I mean, just while reading Al-Fatiha, you just break it and let's go. You don't have to be salam.
No. From what I know in the Shafi'i School. Anything else? Today is nice and short, inshallah.
Finish.
Yes.
Yeah, I find that the number 11 and 12 contradict each other. So how do you clarify that one?
So which one is that one?
When you go back to the pillars, when done something, you go back to the when you are in studio. I suppose not. You haven't done it till yet. You straight there. So you come back again. Shouldn't we not bring it according to number 12?
So we'll pay attention to number 11. Yeah, it says pillars for a sunnah. So we have pillar N, And
Only
sunnah.
for sunnah.
Yeah, if
Okay.
you skip a sunnah into another pillar. So sujood is a pillar, tashahud is sunnah, and then standing is a pillar for al-Fatiha, right? So you jump the sunnah to a pillar, you can't come back for the sunnah. So for example, you recite, after you takbir al-ihram, you recite dua al-iftitah, for example, or tawajjuh, right? And then you recite a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, which is also a sunnah, and then you recite al-Fatiha, which is a pillar. Right? The scholars mentioned that if you start, and then you start al-Fatiha and you forgot to say a'udhu billah, you cannot return to say a'udhu billah minash shaitanir rajim. It doesn't break your salah if you return, but it's disliked to return. Okay? Because once you skip the order, that's it. You skipped it. You jumped it. You have to go on with the order. Anything else? That's for today, inshallah ta'ala. I mean, basically, we finished the main dish of the book. After this, to the end of the book, inshallah ta'ala, we'll try to finish it next week. It's just the dhikr, or the remembrance in the salah. Right. So you have the intention, tawajjuh, and all of the dhikr in salah, including the tashahhud, we'll go through quickly, inshallah ta'ala, the meanings and some of the wordings as well, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair, barakallahu feekum. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept from us, to make this beneficial knowledge and the ability to act upon it, to make this an argument for us, not against us, on the day we meet Him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant swift aid and victory to our brothers and sisters, especially those in Palestine. Subhanakallahumma bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullah khairan.